so nice to be here and see everybody that I know. I have just an introduction, a little introduction. Then we can talk more about, and I can finish showing some image about those objects, the ethnographic objects that I am talking about. Okay. First of all, I think we need to focus in terms of cultural indigenous ethnographical artifacts, objects that were formed most of the museums in Europe in the colonial times. That is a fact. All those objects are played in different museums in different countries. I think more than 20 years, the debate of repatriation and the restitution of those objects are in the front line of the discussion, not only among the museologists, but also in terms of the ethnographical, ethnological, and also anthropological colleagues that have been working different places. I would like to stress 3 points that is important in terms of the whole debate. The first one is practically all the objects that are now in museum is part of kind of stolen moments from different situations from the end of the 18th century until the beginning of this 20th century, and make a kind of trafficking. I use the word trafficking because we know, and some figures that is interesting to know in terms of these illegal cultural assets, cultural objects, is moved around 7 billion or 7 million per year, and that's this number I took from the Arts Review magazine. I'm not have any other comments, but it's just to say there is money around in terms of this illegal practice, in terms of the objects that are in the museum and the arts. The other thing, the second point, is the situation of the indigenous people that I am working more about here in the Amazon, the indigenous people in different places of the Amazon. From the beginning of last century, now there are kind of linked to the missionary or some agents. There is a relationship, the indigenous people with the missionary, and the situation of kind of dependence and also different kind of social organization. That means the local and social organization of the indigenous people, and talk about the Amazon, are in very kind of transformation, and the transformation in terms of their own. For example, in terms of the situation of the indigenous people, the uphill Negro in the northwest of the Amazon, they for more than 90 years, okay, nearly 100 years, they were forbidden to talk about their culture. That was really difficult to talk with them because that was forbidden for the missionary, not talk about the culture and that started only in the beginning of this century. In 2003, they start more or less to talk about that. And to come, for example, some of you know, some of the region, we had last week a very nice seminar about how to deal with the situation of this object. This is the second point, is the transformation that the indigenous culture, the indigenous people are in terms of forced to change, to make the cultural change, but very, very important. The third point is the different context of legal and also juridical way to deal with the repatriation or to deal with the restitution of the artifact, indigenous artifacts to back to the. That is a different situation. In terms of Brazil, we have some. We don't have any formal or juridical practice in terms of how to deal with that. Today, that was part of our commission here, EUIs, to look more specifically and to deal with this practical way in terms of to give subsidies to the indigenous people about the repatriation, because in the legal framework that is not working. From these 3 points, I think that's important to make some discussion, because we, as a member of a commission of cultural cultural heritage and museum, we need to give some information and give some subsidy the indigenous people. Okay,
Right.
as
Thank
you said,
Renato.
five
Yeah.
minutes.
Well,
yes,
no, that was just the introduction. Okay, you can have 5 minutes later on. Okay, so Anna Bottesi, right?
Yes.
Yes, you can
Do you
have
hear me?
5 minutes.
I put
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll put a timer here so I don't
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
time. Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to this seminar. I'm very, very glad to participate. I would like to share with you here today some of my experience in terms of this issue, which is like the repatriation of indigenous people, material culture, which is preserved in European museums. I also work in Brazil, as Virginia anticipated, and mainly in this moment in the Amazonian area, in the states of Pará and Amazonas. I also participated to the seminar that Professor Renato Athias just mentioned in the Upper Rio Negro region. And it was another opportunity to reflect more about this issue of repatriation. I started working with indigenous heritage in 2015-16, already in my bachelor, and I already then could face some of the limits and issues about all this big debate, which is sharing curatorship and collaboration with indigenous people about this material. But real insights about what repatriation is, or maybe should be, came with my PhD. I worked for my PhD with two collections which are preserved in Europe, the collection of Johann Natterer in Vienna and the collection of Alexandre Rodrigues Ferreira in Portugal. And in specific, I analyzed made from Brazil to Europe in the 18th and beginning of the 19th century. And then I tried to share with these objects, or at least the pictures of them, with some of the people which were involved in this process. and of whose objects are preserved in these museums. Of course, not all people, because the collections are very big, but two in specific. And so already trying to perform a sort of virtual repatriation, because of course physical repatriation was not possible, and for now is not possible, who knows in the future. And so these two populations are specifically the Munduruku people of the Tapajós and the Kambeba people of the upper Solimões River. And so after, well, a long process of choosing objects and of course seeing what could be effectively the people with whom it was possible to establish a connection, because we also have to think when we study museum collections that not always it's possible to get into contact with the people who produced the objects, sometimes because we do not have information about it, sometimes because maybe it is not easy to establish a proper dialogue with the population, maybe because there are like internal political issue among association, or maybe we speak with one person but does not represent the whole community. There are a lot of issues about it. So I could establish a contact with the Munduruku people and the Kambeba people about specific objects, which is, in case of the Munduruku people, a feather work collection, which is preserved at the museum in Vienna. And it is particularly important because it is it is related to the trophy head warrior ceremony, which was one of the main social and political ceremonies of Munduruku society in the past. Now it is no longer performed. And for the Kambeba people, a bamboo tablet to flatten the head. And this is also a very important ritual which was performed, and in part is still performed on newborns' heads. And that also is a very important practice to to the production and construction of personhood, like social personhood in the Kambeba society. So my 5 minutes are nearly ended, and I will tell you more about what we discussed about this thing of repatriation in the next slot. It was just an introduction. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Anna. Keletso, where are you now? Did I lose you? Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. As per your introduction, I'm an academic now, and after working at the National Museum of Botswana for over 10 years, which is where perhaps my curatorship started, and the questions that I will ask or that I will attempt to address. And so I come within the repatriation, restitution, from that background, that when Botswana being a former colony of Britain, the background is that we've got over 2,000 material collections from Botswana in Europe, mainly in Britain, and thanks to colleagues, we have conducted in-depth research. So when these conversations were starting and Botswana ratified the 1970 convention in 2017, and also through my PhD research, my main conversation has really been around the injustice done by national museums. And just stating that because the conversation or dialogue has focused a lot from the global north to the south. So my experience has been that, and looking at the situation in Botswana and other former colonies where the first collections were rooted through, or they became first collections in national museums, the same collections. Some of them ended up abroad illegally, but a lot of them were also deposited in national museums. And so my questions on restitution, repatriation has always been nationally inclined. And I will give a case study, perhaps to show how the restitution is also important within borders, if I can put it that way. And of course, the other main point maybe that I can just bring in is that of digital repatriation. You know, the practicalities looking at the divide already within states about the resources, and just, you know, bringing in the aspects of value. You know, these conversations we are having, is the value the same? Is maybe a digital repatriation a sort of hang on in there while we correct, or it's a form of saying, okay, we are giving you access so that at least you can be quiet a bit. So it's just all these questions that are coming up, but those two main points to me, the global North, South, and national dialogues and digital repatriation, is where perhaps I will hang around, or I will concentrate on later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keletso. Renato, now you have your 5 minutes, yeah. Sorry, you're muted.
Oh, it's not Jenny? Jenny?
No, not
Before-
yet. You. I will have Jenny go last. You're muted.
Sorry. The next 5 minutes, I
Right.
will present to you the kind of the object that we work with, okay? And let me see if I can manage to show my presentation. No, it's not a presentation, just a PDF. Okay, I think it's here. Very quickly.
In
Did you
prison,
see something?
this looks like a text.
No, it's after the text, you have the image.
Okay, but we can't see that. Can you?
Okay.
Want to try again?
I haven't tried again. Sorry about that. I'm open in the other. Okay.
Still don't see anything. We see you. It's not nothing.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
so thank you.
All right. Can you lower it? Yeah.
I can send the text if you want later for the people who ask
Fine, but
me. I can send.
Or yeah, just lower it so we
Okay.
can see the image. Okay, there.
I'm show some objects. It's kind of object that have in the region that I'm work with is a shamanic, and all those objects is part of a festival, is part of a ritual that is involved in generally two kind of groups, indigenous group. They exchange music they exchange also traditional practice. That is a bone that is used to play by the people who is on the music, and also to give the tonality of the music for the group. There are many museums in Europe that have a set or a group of this kind of flute. The other one is is part of the object. This is a box. This box have inside the box all the feathers, all the things that show for each clan in terms of the Tucano or Piratapuia or Tuyuca group, show the ornaments of a set of the ancestral, of this ancestral. That is important to show to you. This is kind of a very religious. This is a kind of shield and very specific people, and each group of the region have the only one. It's a kind of identity mark for the group. We can find this kind of object in different museums in the States and also in Europe. It's very important. Me and Anna, we work in different, not a project that she can explain what we try to do in terms of the repatriation, but repatriation in three-dimensional, 3D image. This is a not kind of object. This is very important for the region. It's mark of the power of the group, of the chief of the group, but also the identity of the group. That is normal, but there are different kind of type of this. And this is a kind of cigar holder that is also marks some identity of the group. They are in different places, but they are scattered, they are spread out, and not only. That means all the ancestors of this object are completely spread out in different museums. That is a stick for a hitman, and that's different museum. And also is the last one that you use here to show you the trocano, is the name. The trocano is a big drum, but also is the sustentation of the world for different clans. Okay, work with those objects is work with ceremonials, rituals, and different kind of music, and different kind of spells, because it means also there are always two indigenous group that exchange music and also spells in terms of when they are all together. Okay, this is we have now, for example, the indigenous people. Most of them, they know that this was taken from them, and that is part of the museum. And they decided to look and to know more. There is some kind of idea how they want to have this now. They want to have it in terms of a very good image for them to know. To most, they don't know exactly what those objects are placed in, displayed in the museum. Okay, just to keep the idea of the kind of object that we are working together in collaborative way with the indigenous people, the northwest of Amazon. Okay, Virginia?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Renato. Jenny? Oh, Renato, wait, can you close your screen? Thank you. Okay, let's move this back. Okay, thank you very much. We will have another round so you can be more specific. Jenny.
Hi,
Good
everybody.
morning.
Thanks, Virginia, for the invitation. As noted in the introduction, I am trained in linguistics and linguistic anthropology. So I have come at this through a slightly side direction, but one that I think is ultimately really helpful. I also want to note that I come to this conversation both as an Indigenous person whose ancestors, languages, and cultural belongings, both ethnographic, ceremonial, and funerary, have been taken and are held in institutions. And so my first encounters with thinking about these practices were actually around before I was affiliated with a university or an institution, and it was around trying to get language documentation materials back to my tribe and my community. But I also come to it as now an employee of one of those institutions that houses collections and has repatriation obligations. And so I think there are lots of angles to think through it, but those definitely, the first definitely influences my take on the latter. Within the United States, I would say our most visible framework for thinking about repatriation is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which has been around since 1990. But it does not cover probably the majority of collections that are housed within the United States. So it does not cover individuals who are not Native American. It actually also doesn't cover Indigenous peoples in the US who don't have federal recognition, for example, and it does not other minoritized groups, and then it does not cover international collections from outside of the US context, right? So it's a helpful framework. It's unique to some degree in its existence, but it doesn't cover everything. And so one of the things in my experience in thinking about NAGPRA is that it sometimes creates a helpful framework and way to think about some of the possibilities, but it is just one way to think about it. I have, in the process of my career, as I mentioned, done work around getting language documentation and ethnographic documentation to communities, first my own and then others, and been part of repatriation and co-curation projects, most recently around oral history and ethnographic collections. But under the NAGPRA context, the repatriation of ancestors and associated objects, and then primarily ancestors and other collections from international context. I think, and we can talk more about this later, so I don't want to go over my 5 minutes. But in my perspective, I think one of the most important things for me to highlight is that often the kinds of delineations that people are making between the kinds of collections, is it an object, is it ancestors, is it ethnographic or funerary, or is it oral histories or recordings, right? That is often a kind of bad faith colonial practice, as is the types of delineations people make between categories and contexts. So we would repatriate if it was this context, but not that one, right? This one would be straightforward, but this is too complicated. So I find the kinds of delineations that people make are often done in bad faith, because when we do the work of repatriation, we find that the process is more or less similar, right? Regardless of the kind of collection it is. And so for that, I think I'll end this moment to just point out one of the things I find most helpful if we think about NAGPRA as a kind of framework is that legally, repatriation is defined there as the return of control. It's not actually the return of physical possession, but actually the return of control. And then once control is returned, then the nation or community determines, right? Is it return of physical care and co-curation, or what's happening there? And so to me, I think that's a really helpful jumping off point to think about repatriation as a return of control to communities.
Thanks, Jenny. Okay, let me just say a few things before we go on to the second round that I have kind of told speakers about. I guess in some ways, I wonder if all countries have similar issues or they're not. following Jenny, I don't know if there's a version of NAGPRA in a variety of other places. I don't think so, but I should say also that Jenny has some experience. She's actually really good in Spanish. I'm very picky, but she speaks Spanish really well. Spent some time in, is it Ecuador, Jenny? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Anyway, I guess I wonder, I mean, several people here introduced themselves, but I wonder if you can now actually either go into more substance or react to each other before we can open up. So there are lots of possibilities here. You don't have to follow my questions at all, but you know, I thought that might be a useful thing to do. And I guess I will repeat what I said earlier. If anybody is actually at the present moment not speaking, could you please just mute? And then when you want to say something later on, you can unmute. You can tell me, or you can just, you know, raise your hand or whatever, and I will happily let you have the word. Okay, thank you. Okay, Anna, we started with you. Oh, I should say, there's a particular madness here, but there is a logic to my madness as well. We have typically, I think in the past, I know Clara is here now, we have gone from east to west, partly because of the time zones. In this particular case, I wasn't sure if Keletso and Anna were in the same time zone or not. And I just sort of arbitrarily decided to start with Anna, then go to Keletso. I know Renato is about 3 hours ahead of me, and Jenny is in the same time zone. So that was fine, but I wasn't quite sure. But let's follow the order I followed before. That's all right. Anna?
Thank you. Well, about this thing of time, I'm actually more close to Renato, but because there has been some changes which were not communicated, so I'm in Brazil right now, but we'll make an exception. And well, thank you for also the suggestions of this first round. I really, well, I'd like to pick up with what Jenny said about control, because I think it suits particularly also to the situation that I'm going to explain now, which returning on the studies, the research I was presenting to you before, this was something that came out. So when I went there to these two groups, so Munduruku people and Kambeba people, and started to talk about these objects, meanings and histories and whatever, of course, the issue of repatriation came out and say, okay, these objects are there in your foreign museums very far away. Sometimes they didn't even know that these objects were there. This is very common for people not knowing that their heritage is in some museum or another one. And actually, we don't really know if these objects were like stolen or exchanged or both. The situation is very blurred. There are some situations which are clearer, like the one that Renato is talking about, and others that are not so clear. So we can't really have the certainty of how these objects came to European museums. Of course, this doesn't mean that these people doesn't have a right to claim them back. And what happened is that these two groups, when we approached this topic, they said, okay, look, we're not really interested in having these objects physically back. So I said, okay, why? They said, well, they were taken from us like 2000 years ago, 2050 years ago. So it's a long time we're not having them physically. And of course, this affects us, but more because they entail and encompass knowledge that we are losing, or we are at risk of losing because of the colonial process and the invasive process of imposition of another culture and civilization. So what we would like to have back, more than the objects that sometimes, and in case for the Munduruku people, we are talking of feather objects. So they are perfectly aware, of course, they would like to have these objects back, but they also know that if these objects come back to Brazil and to the Tapajós region, they are probably going to rotten, and like the feathers are going to be destroyed because there are not like the physical and environmental condition for their preservation, like they are preserved in Vienna, for example. And the same thing for the Kambeba people and their bamboo tablets. So what they say is, we would like to have back their knowledge, and not only technical knowledge, but spiritual knowledge and historical knowledge and everything that they can pass on to our future generation, because they are not just still objects, they are living objects. They are ancestors and represent ancestors. So to have all these packed back and to a lot of time to can learn to make them again, and so to pass them to pass to future generation and to students in indigenous schools, the knowledge that they entail is seen as a more important thing than their effective physical repatriation. And so what really came out from this process of dialogue and collaboration, because I think that we should really think about repatriation in any way we can think about it, as a process of shared curatorship and of collaboration with indigenous groups and of dialogue, because every situation is different and really have to start from the demands of each specific community, even if trying to, of course, writing some general guidelines, is to think about ways in which this knowledge can return. And so, of course, this implies to think about projects and activities and initiatives that maybe start from the museum and from that collection, and then act and have a practice effect and consequence in the community and and for the community and its individuals, so that people in this way is really able to regain this control, because it's also able to restart to transmit and to maintain all the knowledge that these objects and these collections entail. And of course, this implies another kind of commitment, maybe also political and sometimes financial. But for what I could see, this is a concrete demand from the groups in this issue of repatriation. So repatriating knowledge and trying to build new projects together that can in some way benefit the community and their emancipation in terms of transmitting knowledge and gaining also public and political space, and so on and so forth. So I stop here, and I hope that some questions may allow me to go deeper in these things.
Thank you, Anna. They will
Thank you.
come. Martha, I see your hand is up, but can you wait? Because there will be ample time for questions and comments, okay? Keletso.
Thanks a lot, Virginia. I'd like to share my screen because I've got some images. Is it visible?
No, right now we see a lot of your, I don't know what this is, email?
What about now?
It's still the same thing.
Okay.
Lectures, Litla, loans, museum 50th celebration, museum digitization.
Sorry,
No, it's okay.
apologies. Apologies. Anyway, maybe I can just talk while trying to share.
Sure.
Yeah, because I wanted to bring up the aspect of domesticating UNESCO conventions. Like in Botswana, we ratified the convention in 2017, and others before then. But when it comes to national legal frameworks, we have not incorporated, for example, the big R's, restitution, repatriation. We've got the national laws, such as the 2001 Monuments and Relics Act. When it comes to culture, we've got another one. But when you look at all these? Because my question has been, when the process started when colleagues started working on the repatriation issue, my question has always been, why is it that we are debating, or we know what should be done, and we also know that some museums, through case studies perhaps that I can share in the UK, are waiting or are willing to repatriate. So I just was asking myself, what's going to happen when which is the legal aspect of repatriation? Are there legal frameworks that are in place? What's going to happen when the artifacts are returned? When it comes to human remains, we know that it tends to be easy, because when they are repatriated, they are buried. But then what about collections? Do they return to the national museums or museums, or do they return to communities? And obviously, it takes us to the aspect of provenance research, which is an aspect that has managed to guide successful repatriations. And then I link provenance research maybe to the aspect also of the fact that I see a problem in trying to correct colonial injustices still in museums through, if I can say, colonial-based classifications. And that is a problem, because if perhaps, if I give an example of an archaeological, maybe mask or that was excavated, or it's prehistoric, what happens with classification is that when it will automatically be acquired into archaeology because of the method. I think that's one, or the time frame. But then you find that it ends up bringing in misinterpretation, because then questions about the relationship with maybe modern, perhaps not so much prehistoric, we never really dwell into that. And then classification. I had a picture I'll try to share again. For example, classification between natural history collections. I was going to show a picture of a basket that has been classified as an ethnography, as we always do. But then you find that that basket is made out of bark and plants that are in the same museum, but classified under natural history. And because of those colonial, if I can use that word, you find then that when it comes to correcting the injustices of colonialism through restitution or through repatriation, where collections come back, then it means that there's a possibility of continuing classifications that communities never really had from the beginning. And so it then comes obviously to the ethical obligations. I will say, whether, you know, museums maybe in Botswana or in Africa or anywhere else have storage, or they don't have you know, legal frameworks, ethically their collections, isn't it, have to be restituted. But that has to happen, isn't it, knowing that when the problem is solved by returning, there are other conversations that we need to have. And perhaps I think my 5 minutes will be over. Another aspect then that is still community related would be that in Botswana, I find that the topic of repatriation, restitution, it's still elite, if I can use that term. That there was a lot of awareness and meetings in almost all villages in Botswana conducted by my colleagues at the National Museum, specifically Dr. Tebele, who led the ratification process. But then afterwards, it's back to us professionals, and it's still elite. And so how are we going to, how can we practically then bring in the material culture owners, because we are ethically bound, isn't it? When we bring their artifacts, it belongs to them. So perhaps during this 5 minutes, I just wanted to bring that aspect of you know, trying to correct past colonial injustices, but not addressing the fact that we are classifying them and cataloging them using also borrowed systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keletso. Very important stuff altogether. Renato, did you want to say anything? Mute, unmute.
Yes. Thanks, Virginia. Thanks, Keletso. It was very important points that you raised now. And I would like to say that in terms of our commission, since 2017, we started to work not only with the legal process in different countries, but also to understand better what kind of repatriation we talk about. I use now two cases, very small case that I would like to stress. One was in Brazil. As I said before, there is no legal framework in terms of dealing with kind of repatriation or restitution. But in 1987, a group of the indigenous people of Krao, they started to ask for well, say they start to ask for repatriation of some materials that was in the museum in São Paulo, and the chief of Krao, they went to São Paulo and they asked for the repatriation of a very specific ritual acts. And I show you the photo. That this image you see there is Kureke, the acts of Krao. That this was in São Paulo in the museum, but no framework they decide to take. How to take this acts to the village? They make a kind of very informal. The museum say, look, you can stay with this object, but the object, this axe, belongs to the museum, but you can have there for some times. You know, that was kind of an arrangement that was in 1985 in Brazil. The other case that was really interesting, because there are a lot of people, the people talk about the object, and you see the mask? No. Anna?
It's not a mask, it is a mask. Mascara.
Yeah, it's a mask of, this mask of Jurupari is a mask that is now belongs to the National Museum in Roma, before called Museo Pigorini, and that belongs to very specific group of the WAU region in the northwest of Amazon. Okay, this mask was taken from the area, from the Franciscan Illuminato copy. They went to Roma, and that is part of was really taken without permission of the indigenous people. When I met in 2003, the Tariano, who knows that the mask is there, they said, look, Renato, we want to have this mask back. We want to have this mask back because this mask is part of a ritual, and the ritual was not finished when was taken from us. Was not finished. We needed to come here because we needed to burn it. To burn it because it's part of the ritual. Make fire. The end is the fire to burn this mask. Do you know this? We want back, but to finish a ritual. These two cases, it's very interesting to understand what's behind the terms of legal terms of we need to discuss. Like, for example, Jenny talk about the legislation that have in the states, but only for the funeral objects. That is more interesting to know more about, because it's kind of a discussion that's in terms of that we need to know in terms of this object. Okay, this is two cases just to show you an idea. Thanks, Virginia, for sharing this.
Right. And can you, before I give the floor back to Jenny, can you get rid of, there we go. Okay, Jenny, anything to say? I have lots.
Sure. I mean, I think there are so many like pieces that resonate and that are so important to think about. And I think especially that like colonial classification and the process where a lot of the decision making and the ways that repatriation is being framed is still so explicitly through a colonial lens and a colonial language and through a colonial framework, that it is like the goal of it is hard to actually realize when those things are still so prevalent and shape every moment of the process. I would say, and thinking about your question too, Virginia, you know, we have the federal law here. It does cover a small subset of collections. So it covers Native American ancestors, you know, the human remains. It covers sacred and ceremonial objects. It covers funerary and associated funerary objects. Interestingly, because it's a law, each of those categories was then defined within the law. And so then you have kind of linguistic debates, thinking about your example, Renato, of like what counts as a sacred and ceremonial object. There's a legal definition, but in the US that actually hinges on continued use and practice of those ceremonies, even though the ceremonial practices were interrupted by the processes that took those objects, right? So the legal framework, it does things and it also creates its own restrictions. I think one of the major shortcomings in the context of this conversation is that it does not do anything for, and in fact, no national law would, right, cover international obligations and repatriation. And so I would say across both like in the US, Native American Indigenous repatriation and international contexts, one of the things I found is that, and I've had conversations with a lot of folks in a lot of different institutions and with different folks at my institution who have very different approaches, that within these institutions, the people who are invested in repatriation find ways to do it, right? They find ways to have those conversations and collaborations that Anna was talking about. They find ways to make it happen, and that's the goal. And the ones who don't want to do it find excuses not to. And it doesn't matter whether there's a law around it or not, right? So they will use classifications to not repatriate, even if the law would require it. And I think that comes down to the major issue that I see in repatriation and our conversations that we're having. And that's that within the United States, and I think a lot of other colonizing nations, so I'm thinking here of the British Museum and the French museums as well, those cultures and institutions have never given up the right to own us. They've never given up the right to own, to possess indigenous culture and bodies and practices, and thinking of indigenous and colonial contexts, right? And along with that, it's that they've never given up the right to benefit kind of financially and reputationally from what that possession looks like. So people will leverage the reason they're not repatriating is because they have a grant to house it, or that the institution benefits from it. And if they repatriated those collections, the institution would no longer benefit, right? And so I think the arguments that people make, the excuses that they make as to why not to repatriate, not to return control to those nations, and then within those nations, the communities, come down to the fact that we have not actually abandoned or stepped away from the ideologies that took those collections in the first place. And so I think we run into lots of issues that until we can address those things, we're going to continue to run into, right, the splitting of collections so that only part can be repatriated or not. And to think about something that Keletso said, one thing that happens very much at my institution and within the US is that increasingly institutions are willing, sometimes eager, to repatriate human remains because those are no longer seen as desirable things to have in collections, but they split off the ethnographic objects, right? They split off the sacred and ceremonial objects because those still fill exhibits in museums, and they still look good as part of research, and so they're willing to repatriate parts of collections even when they were taken from the exact same context, right, side by side, again, because one is seen to have continued value for the institution. And so that unwillingness to either acknowledge or abandon the right to possess, right, and benefit, I think is the major barrier to repatriation, because when that's not your goal, when repatriation is your goal, you find ways to work through and with all of the questions that come up and all of the variation that comes with communities and contexts.
Thanks, Jenny. Before I open up, I have a question I guess I would like to address to all of you, which is, to what extent were anthropologists or are anthropologists responsible for the original collection or the repatriation, whatever? We can talk about this without talking about the discipline, but I think I know that in some of these cases, the collections come from prior anthropologists. Yeah, I don't know, anybody. Jenny, you nodded, so. Am I right?
Yeah, I think it's a range of practices. So they either came from cultural, linguistic, and archaeological, biological anthropologists, or were acquired for them for the institution. So I think through most channels, whether that they were the folks actually collecting, often they were, but also they were the folks for whom the collections were gathered, or who, right, made their careers curating them or doing the research that was based on them, at least within the US. So that's not to say that there weren't amateur and private individuals and even companies that did that work. And one of the repatriations from my institution was the remains of an individual that was stolen by a company, but sold to an anthropology, the Natural History and Anthropology Museum, right? So I think if you were to follow the whole trail, you would have to work pretty hard not to find an anthropologist involved.
Thanks. Anybody else? Anna, is it true in Europe or Brazil? Anna?
Well, I'm still thinking about it, so I will let other people answer.
All right. Anybody?
I can
Renato.
come in.
Go ahead.
Yes, in Botswana, through the provenance research that was conducted that I talked about earlier, some of the identified material in some British museums were connected to a prominent anthropologist. I don't know. I don't think it's wrong anyway to mention the name, Professor Shapera, who has written a lot. And then, and when you go to the Botswana National Museum, half of the collections in ethnography belong to the San communities. That's indigenous group. And that material, when you go through it, it was through the research of anthropologists who were in Botswana who ended up leaving some material, but some were taken. But the one for Professor Isaac Shapera is a good case study because not just material, but even archival material from a community museum where he researched and published a lot about. So anthropology and archaeology, of course, they are connected, played a major, according to me, I can't remove them from the injustices that were done. It's another thing to ask whether, I mean, usually maybe I shouldn't even go to the usual questions of that Professor Shapera has published a lot and given back, but the collection still remain there. And I'm happy that through a case study that I will show of a local museum, there've been ways of giving back to the community.
Thanks. Renato, did you want to say something?
Yes, thanks, Virginia. Thanks, Keletso. Yes, I think the most of the collection are organized and collected by anthropologists, archaeologists. And that was interesting because the name changed completely. For example, if you go to the museum in Spain that I know, and I know all the objects about the indigenous people of the northwest of Amazon, they have names. There's a people, Tucano, Piratapuia, Tuyucas, the local indigenous name. But the collection there in the museum changed the name. Collection of Tenente Coronel Braga. Okay, so most of the museum have the name of the collector as a part of the name of the collection. That's it. It's okay. This kind of, but I think the first thing is to think in terms of museum is more or less change to put the real names of the object. I know it's difficult for them to know the object because when they arrived, this kind of object that I see in Spain, they don't have any documentation at all. That's the name of the collectors becoming part of the name of the object. You know, just to see that it's not the same. There are different ways, and you can see different accommodation of the collections, all the collection. And the other thing, in the last one I'm taking, in Marseille, there was some years ago a museum of the colonies, Museum of the Colonies. You know? They changed the name and they decided to take all the collection and also divide the collection that was only one people. They divide the collection and put the collection in two different museums. That is part of how the administration of the museum works in terms of these two cases means that we need, as anthropologists, to understand and also give some direction in terms of the museum to look very carefully about those objects that are part of the ritual of the people.
Thanks, Renato. Anna, did you want to say
Yeah.
anything now?
Yes, thank you. I think it was good to listen to my colleagues before. I think that more than Brazil, I can talk about Europe maybe, because of course, anthropology and all the sister disciplines have a great responsibility in terms of collecting and also building the idea of ethnographic museum as this, but we don't have to forget that this this group of disciplines like were born at the half of the 19th century, but there was a consolidated collecting practice before this. And a lot of the collections that we have in Europe are from these, for example, scientific expeditions of the 18th and beginning of the 19th century, and all the missionary activity before that period that contributed to create huge collections. For example, in Italy, the missionary activity was extensive, and there are a lot of collections from Dominicans and Capuchins and Salesians and Franciscans, and this is also before the 20th century. So I think that what anthropology did maybe was legitimizing more scientifically this practice and all the dynamics of classification and taxonomy and of course hierarchization that took place within this space of museum. But I mean, of course, now it can also have to change all this context. Don't know if I answered.
Yeah, no,
I
thank
think
you. I guess before we really open up, I guess, yeah, I didn't know about some of these things. I knew about others, but wouldn't you also say that right now the opposite is the case? It's actually, it's often anthropologists who are leading the charge against, I don't know, the past ethical practices or past collection practices. I don't know. Am I wrong? Could be. Maybe there are others who are not anthropologists, archaeologists, whatever, but.
well, yes, maybe
Yes.
it's just a way
It's
of.
not just you. It's not just you. You,
Yeah,
Keletso,
no.
Renato, and Jenny, right?
I don't, in the US, I'm not sure
I don't think so.
anthropology, broadly speaking, understands repatriation to be part of its practice. I think it sees it as an applied practice rather than research. I think it sees it as not original rather than, right? So like working with, if whether somebody's in linguistics, linguistic anthropology, or archaeology, there's still the overriding emphasis that somebody do the excavation and collect the data themselves, so they're not working with existing collections. I think it's seen as service or an applied area rather than something that's at the center of anthropology. So while I think many of the people who do repatriation are anthropologists or anthropologists adjacent, many of whom are adjacent to anthropology specifically because it's not very welcome in the field itself. But I don't know that it's at the considered to be center in the field.
Interesting. No, I don't know. I didn't want to push. Okay, Martha, are you still here? Maybe not. Okay.
Yes, I am. But I don't know
You had
if,
something to ask. Yeah, go ahead.
yes. I don't know if, because I joined in a bit late, so apologies if this question was already attended to. I'm a Zambian. I'm a lecturer at the University of Zambia, but currently doing my PhD. And I lecture archaeology, but I also sit on the cultural heritage sector for UNESCO Zambia. And that's the reason why I took keen interest in this webinar, and I really appreciate to the organizers for organizing this. My question is there a problem when it comes to repatriation? Well, issues of control were taken into account by the presenters, but is it a problem if control is taken back to the communities that are in charge of these artifacts? And if it is not, what is holding back countries other than the economic aspect and the scientific aspect that is claimed to be the cornerstone of holding these artifacts? Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. I think part of your question was answered before, but it doesn't matter because it's very important. Anybody? Martha, were you asking the question of everyone or specific people?
No, specifically, I'm looking at the challenges we've had in Zambia concerning the Broken Hills cow and being returned back. And I know there are a lot of countries in Africa which would appreciate if the process of repatriation of artifacts was quickened, but there's a lot of resistance. And sometimes it's really amazing on some of the, sorry if I will call them excuses given, in as much as I know that we also have to put up some aspects and some control, political, financial, and scientific preparations, but really sometimes it's amazing. So basically I'm coming from the perspective of having experience with the Broken Hills cow. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Keletso, do you have something to say? No?
Thanks a lot. Yes, I will attempt to address it, even though maybe through a contextual background that successful repatriations in Africa are concentrated a lot in West Africa. That's one of the, questions that I always have. And obviously then when you go back to the, maybe the relationship between President Macron right now or France and the former colonies, there was a strong, legal conversations, and that has happened. But when it comes to Sub-Saharan Africa and maybe Southern Africa, because Martha is also here, that's the same question that we are asking. Why is it that it's just not happening, despite the fact that we've answered the questions that legally and ethically countries are bound to do that? So, and also maybe using the aspect in the context in Botswana that also it goes back to the, I think the UNESCO framework that that requisition that is problematic, that states have to talk to states, yet on the ground, museum to museum dialogues are possible. And I have an example of a success story here in Botswana. So there are multiple, there are just complex issues perhaps that keep on coming up. Who controls, we don't have the written procedures. The museum abroad wants to repatriate. The museum in Africa is ready. But you find that there are several aspects that are still a challenge. And that's why I was just giving that example of a state-to-state prerequisite that perhaps, I think I've heard Renato saying it's possible perhaps through the commission to go and have objects repatriated without a state-to-state conversation or state-to-state procedures. And I think it goes back to that question that you are asking also about the fact that there seems to be, that universal approach that seems to be to set the pace quietly. But museums are different, communities are different. So I don't know whether I've answered you, Martha, but I was just using several of these discourses that are in place to say that it's just not happening. But in West Africa, you find that that's where the success stories are. So what should we do perhaps in Southern Africa, Botswana, Zambia, to ensure that the repatriations happen because the communities want the objects, as you're saying. Thank you very much.
Okay. Does anybody else from the presenters? I have a hand up and there's a comment in the chat as well. No? Okay. Just a minute. Claudia, you have your hand up. Can you show your face?
Yeah. Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you very much for all the comments. I'm a curator for South American collections at the Weltmuseum Wien in Vienna, Austria. And so I worked already with Renato and with Anna together. And I just want to add some comments from an Austrian and European perspective. So for example, in Austria, we don't have any law which is regulating repatriation to indigenous groups. There is the wish that it should be only between national states, which I think is very complicated because then you hand over the control of the objects to the national state and not directly to the community. And I know from one case in Chile where the Selknam indigenous group wanted to have a return of a human skull from Germany. And because the only possibility was to give it first to the Chilean state, the Selknam refused the repatriation and they made a reburial in Germany with the skull, yeah, because they maybe trusted in this moment the museum in Germany a little bit more than their state. And we were working on a law for repatriation, and I was very critical because at every point when we wanted to repatriate something, there was a possibility. But with the law, there would be some rules. For example, that it can be only given by state from state to state, that you need a kind of research project before, but maybe will be a good site. But also, for example, that one idea was that only objects can repatriated which were stolen or robbed during colonial times. But I think there are a lot of other good reasons for restitution. For example, when I really think that the community which is connected to the object, maybe the connection is so strong that this object would do a lot better, I would say, job when it goes back instead of staying in the museum, especially in the deposit. So I think what makes my work difficult is for first thing, I don't have any claims for repatriation. Yeah. And we need the claims. We are not allowed to do it in a proactive way right now. I hope that it will change in the future. And we can only, the control of the collection is by the Austrian state. The collections are called to be property of the Austrian state, and the museum can give recommendations. And this is very our responsibility that we give the way to the recommendation for repatriation. And right now, the cases we had, especially with human remains, it was always possible to repatriate the ancestors back to their lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. That was very helpful. Yeah, Renato? Go ahead.
Thanks, Claudia. Thanks, Claudia. Yes, I just like to add something that you need to look for. For example, two repatriation in France. One with the Kanak people, that was some years ago from New Cabroli Museum to the New Caledonia. That was museum and community. That was some kind of object went back to from the Kanak people. But the last repatriation in France with Macron was state by state. You know, all the 26 objects of people from Benin, they received back, but was a different kind of framework, and that was difficult sometimes because the people don't see the object, but all the objects are now in a museum organized by the state of in Africa. You know? This is different in the same country, two different way to deal with the same question. Just that, Virginia.
Sure, thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay. There is a long entry in the chat that I wanted to just take out of the chat. Ananya Achaji, can you reveal yourself and tell us more? No? Did I mispronounce your name? I don't think so. Ananya Chatterjee? Okay, how about Mita
Yes.
Chakravar?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh.
Well, I can. Yes.
Okay. I have worked in Indian Museum, Kolkata, where most of the in anthropology section as the in charge of the section also curator. So here the most of the collection are from the colonial period, the 18th century and the early 19th century. And when I'm looking for these collections from all over world, also we have collections from Africa, we have collections from Australia because it is the British colony. It was the British colony. But the sorry part is that from India, a lot of objects from two communities mainly, the Naga and the Andamanis, that went to all over Europe. If I look forward for this, the Andamanis collection, that's at the very primitive community of India. Still today, they are recognized as the very vulnerable community of India, indigenous community. So there, most of the collections were done by E.H. Mann in 1870s. That is present in the Pitt Rivers Museum, also in Vienna Museum, and also in Indian Museum, and in several museums. So, but the communities do not have that collections. The community has lost their knowledge of this, the making of these artifacts. And same is the case with Naga people. There are some of the objects which they do not have. In last month, it is a very good part that Pitt Rivers has repatriated some of the Naga objects and also their human remains to the Naga community. But this is only the Naga community. But we have also the Andamanis communities and also Toda, of which the British people were very much interested and they have taken this away. So I am very much looking forward for this repatriation, and thank you everybody for having your comments and everything, your knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Ananya, can you, I know you say you don't have a working camera, but can you talk about your concerns? No? Okay, well, we wait. Okay, Jenny, was that your hand?
Yeah, I was just thinking about some of the comments from Claudia and have come up in different places, and that's around I think the onus of the work and what the processes are. I think especially around any kind of frameworks that require things to be initiated through claims by communities themselves. The majority of collections, which end up all over the world with logics that are hard to imagine until you're in the middle of a specific collection, mean that it's nearly impossible for communities to even know what institution has their collections, what the process is. Each institution and each nation and each hemisphere has a different process. And so I think that idea of requiring communities to find out you have something, submit a claim, right, go through the process of legally submitting a claim, right? That's just a framework that prevents repatriation, especially if it's not even the ability to I'll notify groups and have a conversation with them. And that's something that happens in the US as well, particularly by within NAGPRA. There are a couple of different steps and processes, but it is largely, especially outside of NAGPRA, the idea that you have to have a claim, and that it's only at the initiation of community that repatriation can occur. But it wasn't at the initiation of communities for the theft of these collections to occur. And so I'm always really interested in that the repair processes take the same kinds of, right, like initiative. And so if the countries are the ones who initiated, right, that theft and that collection and that holding, then they should be the ones that initiate repair and repatriation. And if the institutions have benefited financially and via reputation by having these collections, then they should be putting that same amount of money, right, and resources towards repatriation itself. And I think that, to me, it speaks to what Keletso was saying in terms of the repair piece too, right? That it is not just returning objects, but thinking about that framework of what was the process through which these were taken, and the repairing of it has to have, yes, the return of control in these collections, but also be really addressing the actions that created these collections in the first place. So, I mean, I know that it's very common, that claim framework, but I think it actually is a process that just allows institutions to keep the collections they have. I mean, from my general perspective, but yeah.
Thanks, Jenny. I think I saw Claudia's hand go up and then it disappeared. Did you want to say something, or is that from before?
And I just want to say, Jenny, that I understand this argument very good, and I think it's true. Yeah. And just to wait for the claims, especially, for example, when I saw the draft of the law, it was not explained what the people who want to claim something should do. Should they first go to the ambassador of Austria in the land where they are living? Should they write to the museum? Should they write to the minister? And I think it was in Canada where they had a handbook for indigenous people who want to do restitutions, yeah, how to find collections. And I think when a museum wants to really develop a good practice, we should think of what, yeah, a kind of a guide. If you think you have collections from you in our museum, please write too, and then we will try to find a good way. And it's really, and this is often the problematics that we have, from my experience in the curatorial department. There are working a lot of great people who are totally open to these processes, because I think we can learn a lot of this out of these processes. And we can, when we document them, we maybe have a better story to tell to our visitors, instead of just showing an object and saying it's from a past culture and it was robbed one time or was brought. So yeah, thank you very much for this. I think that's really important.
Thank you. It's getting kind of late, but I still think there are 2 or 3 things. Anna?
Yes, I was just make a quick comment because there are a lot of suggestions coming here. First, thank you, Claudia, for your words. They are always very inspiring and stimulating. And I totally agree with what was put here. And honestly, I think that, I mean, one of the problems of this issue of repatriation within states is that it really takes away power from both the communities and also museums themselves, because a lot of, in many situations, museum curators are the people who better knows their collection and the history, and are those who are really well, of course, with the community members. So these 2 parts are those that really would have the knowledge to lead this process of repatriation, restitutions, and leaving this to a state governments which probably don't really care about it, don't really get the importance of this process. I mean, it's a way for this not to work and to be just a political action, more than really answering the claims and the deep needs that there are, for example, from cultural perspective and spiritual perspective, for example, of the communities. Because maybe there are situations in France or in other places which there might be even a political interest for France convenience. I don't know, but this is not the case of Italy. If Italian government really don't care about this. So if a request for repatriation comes through this state system, it will probably be accepted. I'm thinking, for example, at Tupinamba mantles in Florence. There are 2 Tupinamba cloaks, and they are there, and probably, I mean, maybe because they are Tupinamba cloaks and there is already a process around them, it could come a request because there is Glisera Tupinamba and another group of people that know how this works. But there are a lot of communities that don't know how this works. So of course, and maybe don't know even where their collection are. So of course, they are not entering with claims because they don't know how it works. And I was thinking about last week's seminar we had with Renato, and we tried at the end of the seminar to build a protocol on how this repatriation should work. So I think that this might be something that also as group and as people working with this topic of repatriation, to start to think, let's start making protocols within the communities and maybe, yes, working with communities to build these protocols so that not only laws from European or like big governments start to put their rules to discuss on this topic of repatriation, but also that communities can really say their opinion and say how they want this to be done, and who they want to talk to, if curators or governments or whatever. So this was just my comment.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Keletso, raise your hand. So.
Yep. Thanks a lot. I wanted to just say, looking at the UNESCO convention, and we can see that there's a problem there. And perhaps there's a need to review such that what happens when a museum refuses to repatriate. You know, there are all kinds of state parties are required, but then there seems to be a lack of a clause of what happens when you know, museums don't do, because that's where other museums or countries hide behind. But also you find that because of the internalization of conventions and like on repatriation, even if a country is not a state party and perhaps communities talk, because of the awareness that has been raised at borders, it would be difficult, I want to believe, perhaps for material to just cross borders within countries maybe. So there are all those ideas. And an example is that in Botswana, for example, in 2000, we received the human remains of El Negro from Spain, and not originally from this side, but because South Africa had not ratified the convention, and repatriation could not take part. So you see some of those issues saying, okay, we can avoid the convention, but then there are those aspects. So I like the fact that colleagues are raising the fact that we need to really work more on, you know, on what can be done. And obviously it goes back to the aspect of ensuring that our communities also are involved, such that we don't just become their advocates as if I can use the term elite. I don't know whether maybe later on, I just wanted to show that picture that I was talking about. I don't know whether Tien can just show that, because it's just an example of, you know, where, you know, the case study for my PhD research of the initiation drums. You can go ahead and show that, Tien, where They were acquired into the National Museum, and then later on, after the establishment of the Regional Community Museum, one of the drums was left at the National Museum. Tian, are you there? Such that up to today, the separation is still insists, but I can't even, I think, pinpoint a finger at the National Museum per se, simply because the community is aware, and at times I feel that I'm the devil's advocate to say that the one that's on top is the one that was repatriated from the local museum. Even they decided that we don't even want our sacred drum to be in our museum, so it's with the custodian. The picture below is the picture of the drum at the Botswana National Museum. That is looked after through scientific measures. When you look at the two, you find that there's a problem. The material is deteriorating, but it's in a good climatic control. So to me, this is an example to say within our national museums also, and communities, dialogues have to be there, because if perhaps the community is not coming forth to say, can you return that drum, perhaps out of ethics and obligation, the National Museum can find a collaborative way. This is just an example, colleagues, to say national museums within our borders also are doing a lot of injustice. But it's also because at times communities perhaps will not come forth to say, at times they don't know. They know it's there, like in this case, they know that it is there, is part of the twin drums. But after my research, it seems I was making a lot of noise, and that's why they decided to take the one from their local museum. So perhaps that conversation also, that goes to the fact that there's so much that, and I'm glad, and I hope that from here we can continue, guiding each other on the protocols that can be in place, because as we know, restitution is also really restoring heritage and value, because we can't use the drum. The community can't use the drum at the bottom anymore. It's completely, it's in bad shape, and it's in a good climatic control because the National Museum has good resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keletso. It's getting very late, but I see that, Anania, I know you don't have a camera, but your hand is up, so I would like to give the word to you.
Hi, ma'am. I'm Ananya Acharjee. Sorry, ma'am, my phone got damaged, so delayed the response, and I could not use my touch screen also. Actually, ma'am, my observation is when I was in field work, so one village that is the vicinity in Bolpur, Shantiniketan, Tegar Shantiniketan, I found one museum is there, but people who are coming to Shantiniketan to explore the culture, Tegar's culture, or especially Vishwabharati. So they how many people are coming to explore this? That half of the people could not able to recognize that one museum is there, and that is solely devoted for tribal culture. And also my observation that while working in Bolpur, that the same cultural erasure also happened with the indigenous tribes of India during the British colonization, because the tribes were converted to Christianity, and their cultures, myths, religious came to be considered as taboo and uncivilized. So, but now the government claims to be trying to preserve and disseminate their culture, but it is being done so poorly that only researcher can learn about them. So that is my field observation, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Jenny, do you want to have the last word? You put something in the chat. You put something in the chat.
Oh, it's only that we were talking about like institutions developing kind of clear pathways for repatriation and also clarity around what the policies for repatriation are. So there's an institution in the U.S. Museum of Man who recently kind of developed they call it the Colonial Pathways program where communities can put in claims. But they also have what I think is a pretty appropriately expansive description of what would be appropriate to be repatriated, right? So it doesn't have to be, many people have mentioned that there might be restrictions around which era did it come from, or can you prove that it was stolen versus purchased, or right? So they have a kind of way, it's just an example, I think, of what institutions might do if they were interested in making that be as transparent as possible. Yeah, that just might be of interest to folks.
Thanks. I know it's now almost 5 minutes to, what is it now? It's almost 5 minutes to 11 a.m. here, which is, it's almost 2 hours since we started. So does anybody want to, any of the presenters want to say any final words or no? Renato?
Yes, I would like just to say that we need another webinar because a lot of issues came here and we need to discuss something to help people in terms of this repatriation and restitution from the museum, to have a dialogue with the museum. But it's my idea, maybe we program this was very good. And I think there are a lot of issues that must be discussed. Thanks, Virginia, for sharing.
Thank you, Renato. Anna, Keletso, Jenny, any? Might just say thank you and goodbye. Another welcome. Oh, yes, okay. Claudia? Oh, that's just, it's not your hand, you're clapping. Okay. All right. Anybody else?
I just wanted to say thanks a lot. And yes, I also agree that perhaps another webinar, and also bringing in more, isn't it, other perspectives. I think it will help because a lot of colleagues, have case studies that can enlighten us. And maybe just finally, maybe also one way is to, try to have established new organizations. For example, in Africa, we've got ICOM Africa. We also have an organization that I work with, Afri Muhere, that looks specifically at saying we want perhaps to come up with frameworks of our own in Africa on how to repatriate. But you see, we need more voices, I think, from colleagues to share, on just what can happen. But thank you so much, colleagues, for your inspiration and dialogue.
Thank you. I don't want to force anybody else to say anything. Thank you all. We will consider some version of this. We typically try not to repeat, but we have done it in the past. So I'll talk to Clara, who was here, by the way, Clara Saraiva, who in a sense really invented these things 5 years ago.
She was here.
Yeah, she has been here for, I don't know, most of the last hour and a half. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you especially to Anna, Renato, Keletso, and Jenny. And obviously, all right, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Kian.
you.